Okay, Sean, it's the year 2000, and Mary Lou Henderson Morris of Houston, Texas, was a 48-year-old loan officer and was found in her car after going missing earlier. Her husband had called the police reporting her missing after she did not come home. Now, they found her body badly burned in her car. The body was burned beyond recognition, so they used dental records to identify her. So authorities had no motive as to why this would have happened. And at the time, Kim Ogg of Crime Stoppers said of Mary, quote, Mary Morris appears to have been killed by a total stranger with a complete absence of physical evidence. So Mary's daughter called the medical examiner's office a few days later, asking when she would pick up her mother's jewelry. And they told her it would be ready at the same time as the body. But here's the problem. They had already had a funeral. They said they still had Mary's body. So how is this possible? Well, 3 days later, another woman, also named Mary Morris, had been found dead in her car, and she too was in Houston, Texas, in Harris County. She was 39, a nurse, and had been seen at a pharmacy earlier that day, had been confronted by a strange man. She had called the police in a 911 call, and in the call, you can hear her screaming and even a gunshot. So we'll look at photos of this, but when you compare photos of the two, they actually look kind of alike, even though the age is a difference of 9 years, 48 and 39.
Yeah, the first thing I was thinking as you were kind of describing that, the way she was in her car, it's almost like and this is probably way off, but it's almost like a hitman that gets the wrong person. You know, it's the name, the age is close. It just, I'm sure that's probably not what happened, but it almost feels like a targeted person who then it was like, oh, that's not the right person. And 3 days later, this other Mary, you know what I mean? The name is Mary. There's a lot of similarities there.
Yeah. Well, you have good spidey senses. I'll say that.
Really?
Yeah. So now this Mary Morris, we'll refer to her by her real name, of course, Mary McGinnis Morris, had been threatened by a coworker recently with a note on her that said "Death to her." This man had recently been fired, so she was not feeling safe and asked her husband Mike Morris for a gun so that she could protect herself. This gun was found at the scene of the crime, the scene of her death. And when they found her, she had been shot in the head, making it look like a suicide. But investigators sniffed this out and said there was physical evidence that suggested it couldn't be a suicide. She had been beaten and may have been gagged. So her husband, Mike, was with his daughter at the movies at the time, he said. So he had an alibi, and not that they were necessarily looking at him, but he would not take a polygraph test. So authorities also found that Mary had a $700,000 life insurance policy. And they found that Mike had called his wife on her cell phone around the time that she was found to be murdered, and that the call lasted 4 minutes. So authorities asked, did he do it? Yeah. So they're asking questions of him. So you were right in your instincts. Was it this guy, or was he talking to a hitman who was there to get the job done? And again, you're good. Maybe one that took a hit out against the wrong Mary Morris, or was it someone else, not her husband, that had ordered a hit? Maybe she had another enemy or whatever, this weird coworker. And so another detective at the time said, when someone is hired to kill someone, they're going to have their information and know their habits. Hitmen just don't go out with nothing. Basically, what he was saying is like, okay, we're skeptical of this hitman theory against both of them because, like you kind of know
because
who
it's
you're
plausible.
going after. Yeah, I mean, like you need more than just a name to go after someone for a hit, right?
Yeah, you at least need to know where they're going to be on a specific time, or there's some kind of habitual movements, what time they leave work or get home, or you need something other than a name. But I mean, I'm sure a little research.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You could pretty easily find that.
Yeah. So let's fast forward to just last year. You had not heard of this.
No.
Okay. So as you can imagine, the families they'd be hit hard, because this has not been solved. That a movie called Maggie Moore's that came out last year was coming out based on true events, inspired by true events, if you will. I'd never heard of this. It's a real movie. It's directed by John Slattery of Mad Men fame, the guy with the whitish hair, right? And stars John Hamm, also of Mad Men, and Tina Fey, and was released last year in 2023. So the movie is described as a dark comedy, thriller, drama, and mystery. And the description reads as follows. Police Chief Sanders investigates the bizarre murders of two women with the same name and unravels a web of small-town lies. He meets and quickly falls for Rita, a nosy neighbor who is eager to help solve the mystery. So if you watch the trailer, which we'll play a little bit of it in the clip here, they say, they definitely play up the husband being involved. They definitely play up there being a hitman. And they do actually mention the $700,000 insurance policy. So I had not heard of that movie. I think it was maybe, kind of direct to streaming or rental or whatever. But it just came out last year. It's so strange. It's got a cool movie poster and all that stuff. So Marilyn Blaylock, who is Mary Lou Morris's daughter, said about the movie, which she found out about on Mother's Day. She said, the fact that my mom is not here is hard enough, but the fact that people will be laughing at the most tragic thing to ever happen to me, she said, there's nothing I can find to laugh about in this situation. I think that's what hurts the most. So, yeah, it's really tough when you see, we do a podcast about a lot of these events and experiences, and I'm sure the family sees things like this in articles and newspaper print, but here's a whole movie that's also kind of dark comedy, right? Like spoofing things a little bit because it is so incredible. And I guess you have to make life of these things, but imagine being the family and realizing that there's a movie about your mother who was murdered on an unsolved case.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've talked about that stuff before. I mean, that's why, I don't do a narrative series, big long podcast, investigative series or whatever, something like this without having the family be part of it. Because, the chances that the family, especially when it's a big series, a one-off episode of something, those happen all the time. And I'm sure families hear things like that, podcast episodes or whatever. But when it's something that might get a lot of attention or be heard by a lot of people, seen by a lot of people, you never want that family to sort of stumble across that or get, their friend says, hey, have you seen or heard this? They've got to be a part of that. And if they're not comfortable with it or okay right out of the gate, you can't really do it. Or I guess you can, but.
Yeah. And so I actually subscribe to I do believe that it was a hit, that was the reason that this happened. Again, it was back in 2000, a number of years ago. And listen, when you hire a hitman, there's discretion, right? Whoever ordered this hit, if this is what actually happened, you are one step removed. It could be, cash slid to someone, it wasn't the dark web back then, but like some mechanism of being able to find someone that will do a hit for maybe a couple $100 or $1,000, and that's it. You never hear or see of that person again. And so it is actually very hard to tie someone back, if it was the family or an enemy or whatever, back to that. But I actually do believe that this was a hit, and that there was an error, that the two women did, even though they were 9 years apart, they did look a lot alike, frankly. And it could have just been a mess up. So that's what I think, but it's still unsolved, so we don't know.
Yeah. Well, and a professional hitman, if that's who it was, And I'm not talking like some assassin, but somebody who maybe has done this before, or if they were smart enough to make sure that there was no physical evidence of them, DNA, hairs, things like that. I mean, how would you find them?
Yeah.
Short of the person who hired them giving themselves up. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So the daughter of Mary McGinnis Moore, I found her Facebook page where she's still looking for leads, still has hope, still has people, trying to help her solve this case. And yeah, we see this a lot. Facebook pages that are these ongoing memories that can travel far and wide on social media that you share with friends and family, and maybe there's a viral moment that happens as this is re-reported, and maybe someone has a lead. And so a lot of times, like, how do I get in touch with the family? How do I tell them, like, through it? You experience a lot of direct messages, right, on Facebook from people that they weren't
social
ready to come
media.
forward on stuff, right?
Yeah, and it feels a little more anonymous, or I think too, people that come to me or to someone like me or you, it's not going to a police officer. I always say that, and a lot of the police officers I've kind of dealt with, in making these projects, I mean, they get that, and they agree. If somebody has information about a crime like this, maybe that they've held on to out of fear or whatever for years, there's the fear for them of, if I go to a police officer, am I going to get in trouble for not coming forward with this?
Right.
And I get that. Coming to somebody, like us, I think that fear goes away in them.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of guilt, like you kind of what you're inferring here is there's guilt of, like, you've seen this with some recent series that we've done together, like Drowning Creek, like, I knew this person, and I should have said something, and I was the girlfriend or the brother of the, whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember these people, man, like, to have them come forward and be pretty brave about it. And I think too, you didn't just get one lead this way. Like, I think we were talking about every other day there for a while about things that were happening, right?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I've had dozens and dozens and dozens of leads come in that way, just in that one project. It's in Drowning Creek, but I mean, some of the other projects that I've done or we've done together, we've had still, people, eyewitnesses to things come forward. It's crazy. That's one thing I love about podcasting and doing those stories is the power of what can really happen. I mean, there's somebody out there who has information, and just maybe it's hearing the story presented or hearing from the voice of these victims or the victim's family, and just hearing from them in a way that they never did before, that is just enough to push them over the edge of, like, I need to come forward. And, we've seen it before where cases get closed that way. That's amazing.
Yeah. And the other thing that I don't think people realize when they listen to a podcast series is, let's just say you received 10 different direct messages on Facebook, right? Hey, I want to tell you about a lead or something. There's not a direct translation that every one of those 10 people are going to talk on the podcast. This is information. This is sourcing. This is getting background. And I think a lot of times it helps assemble a puzzle piece too. Like, there's been lots of occasions where people have helped you on background or as a source,
Sure,
point you to someone else to call, or like, hey, I have a little bit of a tip that verifies something that you already knew, right?
Yeah.
And having a second source tell you that lets you know it's true,
or
right?
a fourth or fifth or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you may hear 8 or 10 voices in a series, maybe, or maybe more, but what you don't know is maybe there's another 10 or 15 people behind the scenes that are giving you information, they're verifying information, they're pointing you new directions, but they're kind of like, no, I don't want to get behind the mic. I'm not comfortable doing that. I'd like to be anonymous. And that's pretty cool too.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, I never, of course you always want, when you're doing a project like that,
right,
you want people to be willing to go on the record, and, it adds credibility to it, but also, just because someone doesn't want to be out there and have their name out there on a podcast doesn't mean they're not credible. So I get it. I'll always take information any way I can get it. It's all about getting information. So,
and sometimes you've got to disguise voices. You don't use last names because just like it's easy enough to find you or I on social media, if I've got a name of someone that's a little bit on the fence, right? They don't necessarily always want their name out there for whomever to start poking them too. So
Yep.
anyway,
So
that is a wrap on this episode. Join us next time on How It All Went South. I'm Jason Hoke, and that's Sean Kipe, and we'll see you next time.